For those of you who are with us for the morning sessions, welcome back. And for those of you who are just joining us, we're honored to have you as part of the 2021 Jewish Leadership Conference. In a moment, we'll celebrate one of the high points of this gathering, the conferring of the Herzl Prize for Jewish Leadership and Jewish Courage to the great Ruth Wisse. But I want to take a minute to extend some thank yous. Tikvah's work in education, including conferences like this one, require the energy, effort, and generous support of so many people. I want to thank Paul Singer, Terry Castle, and the Paul E. Singer Foundation for being strategic partners in everything Tikvah does, our educational efforts, our publications, and certainly this conference. Thank you, Paul, Terry, and Daniel Bonner for helping make all this possible. I want to thank Robert Barron for helping us bring the ideas of this Jewish Leadership Conference to some of the most talented, energetic, and spirited college students around the country who want to advance the cause of Zionism and Jewish civilization in the years ahead. I want to thank Gary Rosenthal for being such a generous friend of Tikvah, including pushing us to use these new digital media to bring our ideas to as many people as possible. I want to thank the dozens of people who have stepped forward to sponsor this gathering. And I want to thank the hundreds of members of the Tikvah Society who have joined our community and who help sustain and support all the educational work that we do, especially with young students. It's now my great honor to welcome Tikvah trustee Mem Bernstein to confer the Herzl Prize. Mem is one of the most creative and committed venture philanthropists in the Jewish world. As a longtime trustee and chair of the Avi Chai Foundation, she's helped build, create, and support some of the most interesting, dynamic, and impressive Jewish educational programs and lifelong learning efforts in America, Israel, and around the world. As a trustee of the Karen Keshet Foundation, she's advanced the cause of Jewish literature and Jewish culture, most notably through the very successful and important website Tablet Magazine. And of course, as a trustee of Tikvah, she's been one of the driving forces behind everything we've done, including being a friend and mentor to me and many other members of our team. When I think of Mem, I think of her practical wisdom and her abiding love of the Jewish people, and it's a great honor to turn the stage over to her to confer this year's Herzl Prize.
Thank you, Eric, for that lovely introduction. A few years ago, the Tikvah Fund, founded and initially funded by my late husband, Stanford Bernstein, and the organization behind the Jewish Leadership Conference, decided to create a prize honoring living exemplars of Jewish excellence. We believe in the importance of honoring our Jewish heroes, and we especially wanted to honor men and women who marry Jewish depth to moral courage, men and women who marry enduring contributions to Jewish civilization with Jewish strength in the face of our era's greatest challenges. We named the prize after Theodor Herzl, the great political Zionist and indispensable founder of the reborn Jewish nation-state. In his time, against all odds, Herzl was a bold, courageous, and visionary Jew. As we look at the challenges facing the modern Jewish world, including the rise of anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism, including among the so-called enlightened elites, and the loss of Jewish memory, especially among the young, Ruth Wisse is the indispensable Jewish voice of our time. There could be no more fitting recipient of this year's Herzl Prize, and it is my great honor, on behalf of the Tikvah Fund and the Jewish Leadership Conference, to confer this award to our friend and teacher, Professor Wisse. I have known and worked with Ruth Wisse for over 20 years, and it is sometimes hard to grasp her remarkable combination of attributes. She is, to her many friends and colleagues, a charming, elegant, friendly Jewish lady, warm and welcoming, a Jewish grandmother, not much taller than 5 feet, just like me. Nothing really to be afraid of. Really? And then she steps on stage, or into a classroom, or behind a computer, and well, another Ruth Wisse emerges, a one-woman army of Jewish argument and ideas whose depth of Jewish knowledge and lived experiences are truly remarkable. What is most amazing about Ruth Wisse is that she excels at the highest level in 3 very different modes: as a scholar, as a teacher, and as the brave, exacting, unapologetic voice of Jewish sanity. Her achievements as a scholar of modern Jewish literature are wide-ranging, original, enduring, and important. Through her commentaries and translations, she has helped preserve and transmit the Yiddish intellectual tradition. As a professor at McGill and then at Harvard, she helped build the entire field of modern Jewish studies in North America. Through her book, The Modern Jewish Canon, she synthesized the entire civilizational corpus of the modern Jewish mind, the stories, novels, and poems that capture for eternity the uniqueness of the Jewish experience, from exile to redemption, from slaughter to sovereignty. Simply as a scholar, Dayenu, it would have been enough to honor her as one of the greatest Jews of the past century. Yet, for Professor Wisse, scholarship matters because the preservation of Jewish civilization matters, and preservation requires transmission, which means teaching. And what an incredible teacher she is. For years, her classroom was filled with brilliant Ivy League students, and she inspired many of them to deepen or even recover their own place in the Jewish Western and American stories. But for the last decade, her classroom has been the thousands of students at Tikvah's many programs, where she has felt liberated to marry her Jewish mind and her Jewish heart. Through careful reading and conversation, she has passed along a bit of her own Jewish soul to some remarkable young people. She has become for them the role model of what Jewish excellence and Jewish conservatism is really all about. And for years, as a devoted and relentless board member at the Avi Chai Foundation, Professor Wisse worked with me and Arthur Freed to bring the same marriage of Jewish seriousness and Jewish passion into America's Jewish day schools. Yet, for all her true greatness as a scholar and her dedication as a teacher, Professor Wisse learned long ago that our majestic Jewish inheritance could not endure through learning alone. We needed Jewish armies, Jewish power, and Jewish political leaders ready to face the great challenges of our time. We needed Jewish fighters in the arena, including the arena of ideas. And it is in this arena, in magazines like Commentary and Mosaic, that Ruth Wisse stands tallest as the courageous defender of Jews, Judaism, and her beloved Israel against all detractors and enemies, external and, yes, often internal. Ruth, it is my great honor to confer upon you the 2021 Herzl Prize. You are truly a Jewish woman for all seasons, wise, patriotic, generous, and brave. And like Herzl, your place as a Jewish leader all these years makes us believe that the Almighty somehow always supplies the right person for the right time, saying and doing the difficult things upon which our Jewish destiny depends. Congratulations, Ruth.
Mem, I don't know how I can ever thank you for that. No one can live up to that, and I hope that no one expects me to. And I hope that no one actually believes everything that you've said. So the first winners of this prize were Natan Sharansky, real-life hero and leader of the Soviet-Israeli branch of the Jewish people, and Norman Podhoretz, decades-long editor of Commentary and the most truly fearless intellectual champion of American Jewry. And now, here am I, a tenured professor who, when she spoke out, was never threatened by anything more than a bad review. So I hope that this award is not an augury of Jewish decline. I can actually think of only one way in which I may be considered an appropriate recipient of this prize. No one could possibly appreciate it more than I do. I honor the people and the organization that chose me as its recipient, and I greatly value everything that it stands for and everything that Tikvah does. You're familiar with the saying attributed to Groucho Marx, "I wouldn't join any club that would have me as a member." Well, that's the kind of irony that Jewish humor adores, the Jew who wants only what is denied him. But while I'm happy for comedians who earn a living by making fun of themselves, when it comes to belonging, I long to work with the people and the ideas where I feel most at home. And for the past decade, that has been at Tikvah. Zalman Bernstein could not have imagined what his associates, Roger Hertog, Arthur Freed, and Mem Bernstein, would be able to accomplish with the resources that he provided. I've been blessed for many years by my association with them. I only wish that I could be the one bestowing this honor on them, on Eric Cohen, the great executive director of Tikvah, on my friend and editor Neil Kozodoy, the founding editor of Mosaic, and Jonathan Silver, his successor, on Abe Socher, the editor of the Jewish Review of Books, and on everyone involved in this effort, here and in Israel. So I truly, truly thank you. Now, this award honors the legacy of Herzl, whose imprint on history grows stronger with every new day in the life of the Jewish people and the Jewish state. If there were still divinely inspired writers among us, they would compose the Book of Herzl on a biblical scale. Given our limitations, we're simply tracking and integrating his legacy. When I began reading and thinking about Zionism back in my teens, when I imagined that I was smarter than everyone else, I thought Herzl was ridiculous for having convened the first Zionist Congress in Western Europe in the concert hall of the Stadtcasino in Basel. Since the heartland of Zionism was obviously among the millions of Jews in Tsarist Russia and Galicia, where lovers of Zion groups had already sprouted and established colonies in the land of Israel, why force those young people to come to you rather than go to them? I wondered what kind of snobbery impelled this German speaker to choose a German-speaking venue. Herzl's idea, as I saw it, was to make Zionism salon-fähig, acceptable in high society, the justification being that the movement needed the respect of the Gentile leaders whose help he was seeking, that he wanted to impress the reporters who would hopefully cover this event. Maybe he hoped to show up the Jews of Munich who had prevented the gathering from being held in their city and make them envious of the glamour that he was creating at Basel. As part of Herzl's effort to dignify the Congress, he decreed that everyone come in formal attire, what we call monkey suits, signifying our inverted contempt for anyone who wore one. I thought all of this had been pretentious and plain dumb. I was a snob of a different kind, a proud Lithuanian Jew whose Jewishness was steeped in Yiddish. My culture admired dignified poverty, as a sign of which my mother's delicacy always remained a slice of kimmel bread with schmaltz and garlic. So my heart went out to those students I read about, like Chaim Weizmann, who could not afford to attend the Congress and went collecting door to door for the money to send a representative of their group to Basel. These were the delegates that you were asking to rent tuxedos? And imagine my scorn on later learning this tidbit, that when Max Nordau, the second most prominent person on the program, dutifully turned up in a frock coat, Herzl asked him to change into white tie and tails, an even higher level of dress. White tie Zionism. Now there was a concept. No wonder the Jewish leftists accused Zionism of being a bourgeois indulgence. Why did Herzl care more about impressing the West than exemplifying the values of those who were actually reclaiming the land of Israel? So I hope it will not disappoint you to learn that I was dead wrong. Just how wrong I began to appreciate when I seriously took up the study of Yiddish literature and realized that had Herzl taken my advice, or the advice of other Jews from inside the Russian Pale of settlement who thought like me, the project probably would not have materialized as it did. Chaim Weizmann himself, future president of the State of Israel, but one of those students who couldn't afford to get to the Congress, later concluded that Herzl's influence, above all else that he accomplished, was due to the fact that he came to us from a different world. Weizmann wrote, "Studying his work, I often wondered if, had he known the Jews as we knew them, had he known Palestine as it really was at the time, he would have had the courage to do what he did. It was just because he came from a different environment that he attempted what others would not have dared to attempt." Everything I learned about East European Jewry supported Weizmann's conclusion. Herzl needed the white tie and tails for the Jews of Berdichev, not Berlin. The formal attire was not meant to shame the East Europeans, God forbid, or to impress them with the customs of European society, or because he failed to understand the extra hardship that it might impose on the penniless students. Had Herzl come from among those rabbinic students and shopkeepers, the Jews of Vilna and Lemberg, who paid their shekel into the collection boxes, he could not have founded the political movement that stimulated and mobilized Jews to take their rightful place among the nations of the world. Here's how I came to understand this. The first work that I was assigned when I began my studies in Yiddish literature, the literature of the majority of Jews between the 1860s and 1940, was a small novel called The Little Man, Das kleine Menschele, by the greatest genius of modern Jewish literature, Mendele Mocher Svorim, who was called the grandfather of both modern Hebrew and modern Yiddish literatures. Written in the form of an ethical will, it tells the story of Isaac Abraham Takif, Takif being a man of influence, who confesses how he learned to be a little man and what that term really means. Abused as a child, beaten by the teacher in Jewish cheder, exploited in apprenticeship to a tailor and then to a cantor, he works his way up to become the factotum of Reb Isser Strangler. You see, there is no subtlety in this moralistic tale, who is the richest man in town and who teaches him how to fleece the community and financially strangle its poor. He does this in hypocritical and cynical alliance with the religious authorities. So the literary confession is a wholesale indictment of the Jewish community, and it warns readers not to follow this leadership into becoming little men, morally diminished individuals. Now, Sholem Aleichem followed in Mendele's footsteps, but with a gentler form of satire that made him the most beloved of all Yiddish writers. He created a gallery of little people with small ambitions, kleine Menschelach mit kleine Hasoges, who were relatively harmless in a dangerous world. His town of diminutive Jews was called Kaschilivke, the shtetl of cheerful paupers. And this is a quotation about Kaschilivke. To provide for the Sabbath, that is their goal in life. All week they labor and sweat, wear themselves out, live without food or drink, just so that there is something for the Sabbath. And when the holy Sabbath arrives, let Odessa be destroyed, let Paris itself sink into the earth, Kaschilivke lives. And since Kaschilivke was founded, no Jew has gone hungry there on the Sabbath. If he has no fish, then he has meat. If he has no meat, then he has herring. If he has no herring, then he has bread. And if not, then he borrows from his neighbor. Next week, the neighbor will borrow from him. The world is a wheel and it keeps turning. You get the charm of this idea. These little people specialize in helping one another, make do with little, make the most out of nothing. In fact, part of this culture began to equate weakness with morality, as though suffering were proof of virtue. The great Yiddish writer and cultural figurehead, Yud Lamed Peretz, I.L. Peretz, wrote a striking story about Bonche the Silent, a man so tame that he does not once complain about the abuse and the injustice to which he is subject on earth, and who, when he is then welcomed to heaven and offered anything that he wishes for, asks for nothing more than a buttered roll every morning. But what Peretz had written as a bitter satire of meek passivity, the public took as a model of suffering sainthood, of righteous humility. Now, I could go on with such descriptions, written variously with affection or anger, criticism or concern, respect or disdain, in support of and in protest against this way of life of these millions of Jews. And all this literary material is corroborated by the historians, who estimate that at the end of the 19th century, 40% of Jewish males in the Russian Pale of Settlement were Luftmenschen, a term they used to describe persons who lived on air with no profession or steady source of income. Marc Chagall, who enjoyed making literal representations of Yiddish figures of speech, painted those Jews flying in the air, in der Luften. When he wasn't doing that, he was painting the Jew as Jesus on the cross, the sanctified martyr. Now, Chagall rendered his past very fondly, but the bright colors could not alter the vulnerability of the community they depict. Jews had developed strengths to compensate for their political dependency. But since those were the virtues of political dependency, they could not do the job of reclaiming political sovereignty. I say this with no lack of appreciation. The strengths and virtues of those self-defined little Jews were indeed strengths and virtues. The many centuries of Jewish life in dispersion had created a mighty, resilient civilization. The Talmud's counterintuitive teaching, who is a hero? He who conquers his urge, produced men who did not have to brutalize their women and children, fight or kill to demonstrate their manhood, or destroy other civilizations to prove the greatness of theirs. These Jews championed heroism of the mind and spirit. That unheroic hero, whom some would call the little man, was the backbone of the same people whose traditions of self-resilience and self-reliance generated Israel's startup nation. Furthermore, we know that centuries of adaptive wisdom had ginned up the beginnings of a national movement long before Herzl. Unlike the biblical Exodus that begins with God's effort through Moses, the modern Exodus story percolates from among the Jews themselves, who ceased being slaves millennia ago and had already begun priming for their homeward journey. Hatikvah was composed by Naftali Herz Imber in the early 1880s and was one of several contenders to become the national hymn of the Jewish people. The settlement of Rishon LeZion, first in Zion, now the fourth largest city in Israel, was founded by a handful of Ukrainian Jews in 1882, 15 years before the first Zionist Congress. Divine inspiration had long ago become part of the lifeblood of the Jewish people in Middle Eastern countries, no less than in Eastern Europe. And once others began forging their nation states, Jews began planning and making their way homeward. So these Jews did not need a Moses to release them from slavery. All they needed was the right political leader. And this is where Herzl became indispensable. The biblical Jews never wanted to be ruled by a king. The biblical Jews, once they were in their land, never wanted to be ruled by a king. But Samuel knew when the time had come to anoint one. The scattered and fiercely autonomous Jews of modernity didn't want any leader either. But Herzl boldly seized the initiative. He was both Samuel and King Saul. He redefined the political situation of the Jews and then undertook to be their first sacrificial head. There were plenty of leaders among the Jews of Eastern Europe. Great religious personalities founded political and quasi-political movements. Brilliant men and women established schools, publications, and cultural institutions. Political parties sprouted on the left with as many divisions and generals as the Russian army. But they could not have founded the Zionist movement because they experienced the Jewish condition from the inside, whereas Herzl saw how Jews figured in the world. All the other Jewish leaders located the problem and its solutions in the Jews themselves, as this people had been taught to do at Sinai and has been doing ever since. Herzl located the problem in the lack of political reciprocity between the Jews and other nations. The Jews could do anything they undertook to do, but until they were on an equal footing with other nations, none of it would matter. And an equal footing meant having the land underfoot. Herzl was a correspondent of a major European newspaper, and he covered politics on the continent and internationally. Others saw only part of the phenomenon, like the blind men in the parable, each of whom touches a different part of the elephant and extrapolates its nature from that. One touches the trunk and thinks the elephant is a snake. Another thinks it's a wall after bumping up against the side, and so on. Russian Jews said anti-Semitism was caused by Tsarist oppression. German Jews, of whom Herzl had been one, blamed it on Teutonic authoritarianism. But when Herzl moved to liberal France, he saw that the organization of politics against the Jews could become even more lethal in a democratic republic. The first European politician elected on a platform of anti-Semitism was the mayor of its most cultured city, Vienna. So forget about adaptation as a strategy of survival. The more Jews adapted, the more they were despised. And forget the possibility of assimilation. The emerging nation states were not looking for mulattoes. Jews had to establish political equality and gain political peaceful coexistence, nation to nation. The only hope for them lay in Jewish political independence within their own territory. But this was also the only hope for the world that was sliding into the hell of anti-Semitism. Jews had to establish this reciprocity quickly, not only for their own sake, but because anti-Semitism was also the gift that kept on giving, gift being the German word for poison or virus. So Herzl told the Jews that they were politically ready. There was nothing more to white-tie diplomacy than putting on its costume and assuming one's rightful place in the family of nations. He showed them how to forge political autonomy, which included helping Jews everywhere, because addressing those hardships was part of the Jewish ethic of collective responsibility. This made the Jewish people big and worldly, not small and provincial. Jews did not have to wait to be admitted into the international fraternity. They had already proven themselves many times over. Herzl enunciated the Jewish claim on a world which had not yet risen to their level of mature behavior. Herzl's greatest asset was not merely that he came to us from a different world, as Weitzman put it, but that he was not a Jewish apologist. Had he been even slightly tinged by Marxism, he would have bowed to the movement of proletarian lives matter that was overtaking the youth of Europe. Even many of the youngsters valiantly moving to reclaim the land of Israel called themselves labor Zionists to justify that their national impulse was tempered by the Marxist idea of progress. And on the other side of the Jewish divide, had Herzl been raised in certain branches of Jewish piety, he might still be apologizing to the Almighty for not yet having met his divine standards and promising to do better. Luckily for us, Herzl was a proud pragmatist when the moment called for political leadership, and although he could not part the Mediterranean Sea, he did everything he could to bridge the way. So we are here celebrating the fulfillment of Herzl's mission that far succeeded his dreams. The reality of Israel surpasses the most optimistic projections of Zionism, but the rest of the world has failed to evolve in tandem with the Jews. Anti-liberal Arab leaders and Islamist imams, communist and socialist ideologues, violators of human rights, resurfacing xenophobes of Europe, intersectional confederations of grievance and blame. There are more forces organized against Israel today, even now that its situation is improving in relation to some Arab states, than were aimed against the Jews a century ago. Thus, our work today corresponds exactly to what Herzl called for in Basel, reaffirming Jewish political sovereignty and ensuring that it remains unquestioned. Israel was, is, and will be the Jewish homeland, and the world is much better for it. Opposition to Israel on so many fronts has intimidated some among us. We have to shake up the faltering American Jews who are shrinking back into the little Jews of Nebish land and make them stand tall again, make them muster the political strength they failed to show in the 1930s. We Americans have all the benefits of Herzl, who stood at what was then the center of the political universe, with the added advantage of citizenship in the land of the free. There is only one effective way that Jews can repair or can help to repair the world, by ensuring unequivocal, unconditional respect for the Jewish people in the Jewish state. Jewish statehood is not provisional, not conditional, and certainly not required to justify or prove itself to its enemies. Anti-Jews are everywhere and always the enemies of civilization and must be opposed. America will only be as strong as its defense of its fellow democracies, and that begins with the Jewish state. So the work that Herzl heralded is ours to continue. Israel has begun the transformation of the Middle East. Our job is to see that 21st century America does not return to the worst of 20th century Europe. And no, I'm not recommending that the next leadership conference be convened in formal dress, but please, for God's sake, let us remember that what we stand for here is the nobility of the Jewish footprint in history. Thank you.